Welcome to DejaVue.
It's your favorite Vue podcast. And, well, we're here. Michael, my lovely co-host, I hope you're doing well today on this bright and sunny day.
Yeah, well, maybe bright and sunny for you. It's a little cloudy here, but we're in very different parts of the world. So
Indeed. Yeah, in Amsterdam, surprised to say, good weather that also applies hopefully to a big part of Europe, where also our guest from today's episode is in lovely Bordeaux. We welcome the CEO of NuxtLabs and the creator of Nuxt.js, Sébastien Chopin. How are you doing? Ça va?
Hello, ça va très bien, merci. I'm very glad to be invited and be a part of this podcast. And the weather is also surprising beautiful today in Bordeaux. So
glad to hear that.
Great.
I mean, well, not really surprised, right? I mean, come on, we can't let you miss you out on a podcast episode when it comes to the Vue.js ecosystem. There happens so much where you've been involved, and I hope we'll get a good gist of some of it and some parts of that today. So yeah, glad that you could join. I hope the listeners out there will enjoy the episodes. And as usual, if you have any questions after doing the episode, then drop them below. We'll also get Seb to take a look at them if we can't answer them. So drop them in, or on social media, of course. Yeah, and then let's start straight away with the big elephant in the room, the creator of Nuxt.js. So maybe it's a good start. We like to start with the topic for a lot of people coming to the podcast. Before you created one of the most successful meta frameworks out there, how did you get into programming after? And how did you and the Vue way cross paths?
That's a good question. I did my first website when I was I think I was 12 years old. We had a basketball group doing a playground basketball, and I wanted to have our website. And I used the website builder back then, so they were there for a long time. At one point, I wanted to add a chat. And for this, I had to learn PHP because it was this kind of script you could inject. And to learn PHP, I had to learn HTML, then CSS, JavaScript, and then PHP. For the small anecdote, at the end of the PHP tutorial, I was about 13, 14 years old. I cried because I was like, no, this can't be it. I didn't finish learning PHP. That's it. And then Alex, my brother, gave me a challenge. I came back from school and I was like, oh, we need to create a PHP game based on a TV show we were watching. And then it was a very big challenge to me. Okay, how can I create a game? I need to imagine the database. So I went into SQLite, PHP. It was not functional programming, so it was pure declarative programming. It was amazing to discover what you can do, the infinite possibilities. And then I discovered Ajax. So I went more into the JavaScript. A few years later, I joined a startup after I was 90 years old. I had the chance to learn Node.js. 2011. It was also Socket.io coming. It was not that popular in France. So I had the opportunity to work with Node.js, create some tutorials in French about Node.js, MongoDB, Elasticsearch. That's things more commonly used today. And I had to create an admin interface. And for this, I had the chance to work with Backbone.js. I had to use jQuery a lot for my PHP game with Ajax. So Backbone.js was a nice framework on top of jQuery. And after a few years, we saw Angular, React, and Vue. Backbone was declining. So I had to choose another path. So React seems to be the right choice from a Backbone.js background. But Alex told me you should check out Vue.js. And I was in a hostel in Ireland when I discovered the Vue.js.org documentation. And I remember I read on my phone for 3 or 4 hours the whole documentation of Vue.js and just fell in love. Everything clicked. And I was like, this is so simple. When you used to do jQuery and Backbone.js, Vue.js was just a relief. React was also powerful, but it didn't click the same way as Vue.js. And that's how I got started. I didn't have a project to build back then with Vue.js. So I was basically answering all the questions on the old forum and Stack Overflow. So then we all know Linus took over on this on the answering machine.
True that.
And props to him. And so we had this e-commerce website, and at one point I wanted to have this SPA experience, and Vue 2 came out, so I wanted to rewrite this Node.js website with Vue.js and server-side rendering. And as I was watching Guillermo for a long time since he created Socket.io, I have seen the article about Next.js, and it clicked like, okay, I'm using Vue.js with the server-side rendering. I'm a big fan of PHP. This seems to be very similar. So I gave myself the challenge to do the same with Nuxt. I think it was 1 or 2 weeks later, I had the first prototype. And Kazupon, the maker of Vue ITN, tweeted it. And then he starting to have some views and people starting creating issues. I was so happy for the first issue.
Traction coming in. Yeah.
And then I think I saw you quite early, Alex, helping me on the answering. So I'm glad that we're still around today and talking. So.
Yeah, definitely. Like it's been a while. I remember I think I first got in touch 2017 or so of Nuxt.js. So yeah. But I mean, also on your side, it's such a journey from okay, PHP, and also your brother, so Alex, also making frequent appearances, more challengers. Mm-hmm. So hey, let's work together and get things done. I remember also when Nuxt was in the first, just the first stage, and he was also interested getting static site generation in there. So
yeah, so Alex was doing a lot of Hexo. I think it was the Hexo framework, similar to Jekyll. Yeah, so it was an alternative of Jekyll for Node.js, which was called Hexo. And so he was doing a lot of static sites. So I remember when he asked me, but now you do server-side rendering, can you generate a static site? And I was like, yeah, this should be very easy. You just pre-render the pages. So this is his first pull request, I believe. I told him, this is easy, take a look. This is how it started. And I remember at the Vue.js meetup organized by Eduardo, maker of Vue Router today, Evanu was at the first row because we had the .js conference right after. And we were presenting Nuxt and the Nuxt Generate feature. And I think it was the first time it clicked in Evan to say, okay, you can also pre-render pages and have this static site generation with Vue. So great times.
Oh yeah, and it's all being it's almost a decade ago, which is the craziest part, right? 2016, I think was
we're more close than the 10 years, not 5 years now.
Yeah, it's been
I'm
a while.
sad that I was late to the whole Nuxt party. The first few years I was using Vue with a Rails backend, and so I knew about Nuxt, but I never had the opportunity to really test it out or try it out. But
now you're there.
I'm glad now. Yeah, exactly. I'm here now. So
exactly. And actually, this might be a very good segue. There might be some people out there who are in the same position as Michael was back then, or journalists hey, Vue, amazing, that's great. But yeah, I heard about Nuxt.js, maybe a few podcast episodes here, or read about it online, or checked out some comparison articles. So, Sebastian, what do you say would be the elevator pitch for using Nuxt.js and not just plain Vue?
Well, now we have many features. For me, it was at first comparing plain Vue to Nuxt was the abstraction of the build step of Webpack. Because at the beginning, you needed a Webpack config, understanding what the fuck is this file for.
That was confusing.
Now we have the Vite config, which is easier to understand. So first, it was about abstracting this complexity and put it into a CLI. Then we had this convention over configuration. So the pages being able to generate, removing the Vue router configuration and think about pages similar to PHP, while having this best practice in mind. So code splitting, tree shaking. So obviously you won't have to find the best practice and implement them manually. Now we have the ability also to choose between server-side rendering or single page application, static site generation as well. You can also benefit from the whole module ecosystem. So it's very pluggable, so you can move faster. I think it's good to test the Vue only part with Vite. You can also add plugins, but then you get a unified experience with Nuxt. Maybe before it was true with Nuxt 2 that we add many features, so it was heavier. But today with Nuxt 3, it's very lightweight. And if you try to have a minimal application with the head management and what we have, you get the same size. If not maybe bigger, because we after 8 years of experience, we are very proud of having a minimal and progressive framework. So personally, I don't see a reason not to use Nuxt, except if you have a backend framework already, such as Laravel or Ruby, and then it makes sense to mix Vue with your backend framework.
So like something that already server renders your application, but like more traditionally for like, I said like Django, Rails, and so on and so on.
Even though I would recommend to have an API and then use your Nuxt server, but both will work.
I get this question asked quite a bit actually about Nuxt, and like most technologies, you have like, okay, there are pros and cons, and like, okay, like should you use GraphQL? Well, in this situation, you should use it. In other situations, you shouldn't. But with Nuxt, people ask me, oh, when should you not use Nuxt? But because it is so progressive like that, where you can build just a single page app with no router, if you like just a single component, and it won't ship anything. So it's my answer is always like, well, you should just use Nuxt probably. And it always feels like a cop-out answer. And I'm always like trying to think, well, there's got to be like a good use case where it's not good, but I just haven't found that one yet. Other than like like I was mentioning before, we already had a Rails app that we were migrating from jQuery to Vue, and so then it's like, okay, well, we don't need all the backend stuff; we just need the front end. So then we can switch it over that way.
Yeah, like I was also sometimes thinking, but even the excuse of people saying, hey, I don't want to use Vite for whatever reason, but like I want to use our ASPEC or so, like because our whole company is using that, we have certain pipeline, or even like Webpack. Even that's not an excuse nowadays anymore, because I think Nuxt is the only like major framework that's like supports multiple build tools or bundlers in this case, which in a way also makes it quite unique, I would say. So while a lot of like frameworks opt into like, okay, we're just a Vite plugin, or like you can use it in that way, I think I haven't seen it anywhere else where it's like there's an adapter for ASPEC, for Webpack 5, for Vite. And it's super interesting to see also like that the degree and the choice of freedom goes beyond what you use in terms of like libraries and if you use the Vue router or not, but even like for build tools. So that's cool.
Yeah, we try to make it as agnostic as possible. So, and we don't know how long Vite will stay. I hope as much as possible. But so far, we didn't know Vite will come when Webpack was leading the market, opening the place to other competitors while being the ability to adapt, I think makes Nuxt a future-proof choice.
How well does Nuxt scale to like bigger enterprise applications and like really complex architectures? Because I mean, I haven't had a chance to work on that stuff myself with Nuxt, but like if it does break down or not work as well, like that's probably where I would guess that it would have some challenges. But I'm sure there are people using it. I just don't know about it.
Yeah, I think Alex is doing also working on some big customers. I've been chatting with Back Market, who is not we're still a startup, but they have a big e-commerce website for refurnished phones, electronics, and they use the layers as a domain-driven development or feature-driven development, and so far it works very well. I think after talking to Upwork, who is another, I don't think you can call it a startup, but an enterprise with a lot of code for them. And where I think we can improve will be this kind of micro front end, or the ability to ship a component without having to rebuild the whole application. This is a new complexity that is quite exciting to work on. But that's where we are in terms of high complexity for just about saving them much more time. But it's possible to work with, I think, hundreds of developers on the Nuxt code base.
Probably even more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also to add on that, I think that especially with Nuxt layers, it's really nice to have the option to either feature slice, or for example, what Funda is doing, a big like Dutch company for basically real estate listings. So they also use layers, but each of their layers their own micro front end. So, and then they have, for example, also a base layer where they have certain functionality that's shared. So it's very interesting to see what's happening there. And I'm also curious where this goes with like multi-app support at some point and so on. Also, if incremental builds sometimes would be possible. different pipelines, that would be like, I think the icing on the cake, where especially cutting down the times, not even like, of course, like modern tooling, when we discussed it in previous episodes, well, like roll down will already cut like build times a lot. But if you don't even have to rebuild certain parts, that would be pretty sweet.
Yeah, I would love the ability to rebuild like a header without having to redeploy the whole site, or to rebuild the whole site while keeping the client-side navigation. And I think this is something to work hand in hand with the build tool. So
absolutely. That's true. So I went briefly to an NX summit, and Elise from the Vue and Nuxt community was given a talk about Nuxt layers there. And a lot of people came and asked like, hey, can you do like independent builds? Like, and can you like reuse the build artifacts and so on? So literally what you were just mentioning. And I think there, especially for enterprises with like sometimes a lot of build artifacts that are depending on each other, it could be so interesting to see improvements there and get even more out for bigger applications on Nuxt.js.
I'm wondering what it could give to have the ability to pre-build some layers, but stuff to explore. So that's exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then beyond all the other performance improvements and things happening, I mean, Nuxt 3.17 shipped super recently, 3.17.1 even today, I think. And there with like the refactoring of the like data fetching layer and so on. So there are a lot of things coming that make things even more elegant in Nuxt.js, I'd say. From that, I'm wondering now that, as you said, like, okay, we're like closer to 10 years than to 5 years, quite closer for Nuxt.js. What would you consider some lessons learned from like building and being involved in Nuxt for that long? Anything that you could, I don't know, give other developers, library authors, open sourcers on the way with like, hey, these are things that you should do, shouldn't do, or just interesting experiences?
That's a tough one. I think being able to listen to people is very important. The ability to say no and also be true to what you believe is the right path. Being able also to admit that you were wrong. And but this is, I think it applies in many ways in life, not only in open source.
Fair, yeah.
For me, the ability to delegate and trust while giving the this range of freedom and authority was important for me to be able to motivate people, because we had Puya as the lead of the development of Nuxt 2 and Nuxt 3 and the creation of Nuxt 3 with the help of Daniel, and then Daniel took the lead for the Nuxt 3, giving them this, because at the end it's my baby I created at the beginning, and saying, okay, I trust your vision and I count on you. And that's challenging, being able to trust as much a person, but it also gives you a freedom to think and explore new ideas, because then you're less in the day-to-day about issue triaging and helping people. I think this is, for me, the more challenging part. But otherwise, if I need to give tips, documentation. And sometimes I arrive in some pull request of Nuxt, and I'm like, did you write the documentation for this new feature? This was one of the best practices I wanted to ensure, is every new feature, every change should also be combined with a documentation change. Documentation is the more important part of an open source project. It's also the marketing. So if you want people to use your open source project, you want to help them use it, and making sure they're excited to use it. And I think that's why Vue was so popular, because their documentation is incredible. And I know we have some work also on the next documentation. So
yeah, no docs are perfect, of course. But yeah, as you said, I think like giving people an easier time to understand your project, like how easy is it to set it up, to get going, how intuitive are things, so docs help there. But of course also like keeping DX in mind while developing the whole thing, and not compromising on that, or like user experience in this case, because our users are developers, right? So yeah, that's a good one there.
And also trying to explain the why we took some decisions, I think, is very important. Something we didn't do, and I think Vue was doing very well, is the comparison about why Vue, and the comparison about versus React, without this silly comparison we can find on other frameworks, but they take a specific charts and saying, okay, we are much faster.
Yeah,
not mentioning someone except Astro, but that's,
just want to say we covered that, I think, at some point in the episode about that already once, with that crux data that Astro used, and where the chart was not starting at 0 at first, so it looked like a huge difference, and then it wasn't that significant after all, but still, interpreting
data. That's my least favorite thing.
Yeah, this is low, but I'm thinking about I'm talking about true comparison that gives the right things to choose between what framework to go with. So,
but what do you think, and from your perspective, are things that like frameworks should be compared of like apples by apples, and what people should decide on which framework to use? Because I think there's also a common question. There's a new project, and then there are 3 people with 3 different opinions, and probably more who maybe don't care whatsoever. But which framework should pick then? What should be used as a metric to compare?
That's a tough one. I don't know if people have the time to test. Yeah, for a framework at that size, it's harder. And most of the time, when it's about Next.js versus Nuxt, it goes down to a Vue versus React. Until Nuxt supports React or Next supports Vue, I don't think this will happen. We're more than happy to say use Next or Remix or a 10-stack start if you're using React. But I think in terms of comparison of features, we are quite similar today. So I don't know if table comparison of features will help. I think it would be beneficial anyway to see that we have feature parity. So people would not be about some marketing that we forgot to add or vice versa, saying, okay, they have the same features. So what I can do on Next, I can do it on Nuxt and vice versa. So it's more about teaching what frameworks can do at the end versus we are better because we have this feature, for instance.
I think it's kind of interesting that, like, my own opinion on this is that it's actually more of an emotional decision than like this data-driven thing. So, like, for you, when you discovered Vue and you were sitting on your phone for 4 hours reading through all the docs, and you're like, wow, this just clicks for me. I think like that's really the thing. It's not like, oh, this has this feature, this is, 20 milliseconds faster. It's more like, oh, I really love the way that this works. Or even like, I've been hearing about this framework for so long, I really want to try it out now. And like, that's the thing that's going to be interesting and motivating for me to like get my work done. It's more than like, oh, we ran some tests and here are the numbers and this chart proves that this is the right way to go. And I'm not excited about it, but there it is.
Very cold analysis. Like,
yeah. I think actually the way like frameworks are chosen in companies is like people decide I want to use this, and then they find all of the data points to like convince their coworkers or their
that is for sure
whatever. Yeah,
that's what when I was giving conferences and meetups, I was most of the time talking a little bit about the features or the choice of convention versus configuration, and at the end I was like 70% of the time I was just making a demo at the end, so they were seeing how it looks like to code with Nuxt. And I think that's the best way to showcase all the features, is to see this is the experience you will have for making a website. Because our mission at the end is to give the best developer experience, to create the best user experience.
That's a good one. I really think, especially for like bigger companies starting new project, some like at least I've seen it in some scenarios as well. There are these like cold factual analysis, as in, okay, what's the like lowest risk for the project in terms of stability, ecosystem, like job market is always something. Well, there are also a lot of opinions on that. But also, I think in all of these, like Vue is not doing that bad. I mean, sure, like React is the dominant thing, but we've said it on the podcast also multiple times, right? Like we are, even though all of us prefer Vue, if it would be like we all be desperate for a job, probably we could write Angular as well or React as well. Like we're all JavaScript, like we know how to use frameworks, we know how to use JavaScript and TypeScript. Then it comes down to personal preference as well.
Indeed, at the end it's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So,
and the concepts like components and like slicing them and how to interact, like sure, maybe events up and props down as a thing in Vue. In React, you might send like more functions down or whatever, or like had like render props back in times and so on and so on. So there are different ways of doing it, but you still do like the concepts stay the same. Regarding React though, and I mean, you mentioned if people use React and prefer that, then they can use like 10-stack start, Next.js, React Router, aka Remix, or there's also like Waku and so on. There are a couple of things in the React universe, a couple of meta frameworks, so to say. Have you ever thought about like Nuxt.js and React?
We thought about this because we can select multiple build tool You can choose between Webpack and Vite. You can choose between server-side rendering or not. You can choose between having Vue router or not. Why not choosing between Vue or React? I have no expertise in React. And when I see the amount of issues, maybe because of lack of documentation or lack of comprehension, just with Vue supporting suspense, the way we work with async data, adding React, where in the community there are already nice alternative and beautiful alternative, I would say. It's been too long. I didn't try Next, but I believe they have still a very good framework. I don't feel the urge or the need either from our community to add React. So yeah, sometimes you have to say no. So that's on this part. The only time I tweeted about this was for the 1st of April.
Classic, yes. Though, I mean, technically, as you said, you could, in theory, fork Nuxt, put React in there somewhere. Like, I remember the talk from Danny Rowe, who was also here on the podcast a couple of times, and he was, I think, at AgentConf showcasing Nitro and React to basically build your own little meta framework. And as Nitro is the server engine of Nuxt, that's possibly also possible to integrate.
And that lead to 10 stack start at the end. So that could be a good alternative. Then it's all about the convention you add for data fetching and stuff. So
as context there, maybe because Nitro is the server engine, is also powering 10 stack start, solid start, analog, and so on. Just for people not being aware of that, that's good to add there.
Nice long.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice long
that's I don't have any more.
Yeah, that's it. Okay.
All right.
It was a perfect ending. Like indeed, Nitro is easily a server engine of Nuxt. And at the end, if you want to use React, you can also use with pure Nitro and React. But honestly, there are good frameworks for React.
And probably not that many React developers here, but don't try to put React to Nuxt then, or do it as a fun project if you want to learn more about the internals.
I use React in NuxtHub for the admin.
No, really?
But it's for the Drizzle Studio, which is made in React.
Okay, good. So you had no choice there. Third-party dependencies.
Yeah. I'm importing React in a Vue component. So
there was also like React Vue, I think, from like Anthony Fu, who'd like said, hey, you can use Vue in React, like composition API, like something like that. It's not maintained anymore, but it's a fun project, and it's incredible what's possible.
I did some experiments many years ago with like embedding in between, because we had like a bunch of teams. I was working on a component library in Vue, and then we had another team that was like using React. I don't know why we chose two different frameworks. That was like before I arrived, but then they were like, this team using React also use this component library, and I was like, I don't know, maybe. So I spent a bit of time playing with that, and it's kind of janky, but it can work.
Web components, I heard. Oh, but we don't want to open that kind of worms or that topic. Instead, like, I think it's really interesting to see the same with like inclusion Vapor, like the Vapor mode for like React, Svelte, and Vue, the project from Kazopon was already mentioned before. So like maybe there is some way to like true framework interoperability in a way. And at some point, we might not have to fight which framework to use, but use one we're all happy with, or at least most of us.
Well, and to give more context there, I think a few episodes ago, I don't know how long ago this was, we'll link it in the show notes, but we talked about how Vapor mode in Vue basically compiles down to just JavaScript. So then maybe that could become like sort of like an assembly language for front-end frameworks. And then if you have all these different frameworks compile down to, this Vapor code, then then we can run just like the JVM in Java with bytecode and stuff. Could be interesting.
It's super interesting. I think like there was episode 44 with the predictions for 2025, and then Daniel mentioned before was predicting that 2025 will be the year of Vapor. So let's see at the end of the year where this got us. Still waiting for.
We'll have to do a review.
Yeah. We have to like react to the prediction. Like, here's what came true and what not. But another thing that came true on the end of Sebastian is that quite some years ago now, but like I think 4.5 years, probably even longer, you founded a company or rebranded a company, but in this case, like founded a company, which is now known as NuxtLabs. So how was that for you? How did you why did you found a company, first of all? And how has it been the last years for you?
created Orion, which was called back then with Alex in March 2017. So I think it was 5 months after creating Nuxt. I was already doing some freelancing for the e-commerce website I had that I ported to Nuxt. So it was a way to bring some income to this company, same for Alex. And then with the rise of Nuxt, we had jobs back then. So we were doing workshops, we were doing consulting, and our goal was at one point to be able to be independent and keep working on the framework full time. The sponsors was also growing as well on Open Collective. GitHub sponsors was not a thing back then. And but we were struggling because it takes a lot of time to maintain a framework. It takes a lot of time to prepare a workshop, to consulting session. And we had an opportunity in 2020, I think January 2020, to have a seed round. So we had a First Mill Capital, who are from England, was very excited about the open source. It was also the hype of the open source, which is now the hype of the AI, as you can see. And we were like, yeah, we are open to give a share of our company if we can start working full time on open source and basically figure it out what we can do. Building the framework was the main priority. Being able to answer all the issues, grow a team. So at that point, we were able to contract Puya, some core team member, and also designer in order to develop the identity of Nuxt, trying to be as consistent as possible, giving the assets so Nuxt module could look the same. It was also the time where we started building Nuxt content. So we created a Nuxt image. So I had also joined the team. So we created modules that are all MIT licensed. So that was 2020. Then we tried different way to monetize. We didn't want to monetize directly on top of Nuxt. So we decided to monetize on something we built for ourselves, which is Volta, that we actually keep using today, which is similar to Linear, but completely synced with GitHub. So we manage our notification. It was also a good way for us to try Nuxt 3. So at that time, between 2020 and 2022, we were building Nuxt 3. So we worked on Volta. That's also how Nuxt UI got created. And in 2022, so we were showing a good traction, but still not, it was a pre-seed round. In 2022, we had a seed round led by Isai, a French venture. That's how we were able to have more people working on open source. So we contracted Anthony Fu as well as Daniel Rowe. So we had the open source team growing. Basically, I would say 60 to 70% of the team are working on open source full time. So we could have do this Sentry pledge, but it would have been way higher. And I think it's similar if Vercel joined the pledge. There are so many people working on open source. So at one point, you're like, we're like an open source company at the end. We want to build open source projects and we want to find a nice way to be sustainable. So we are not aiming to build to scale like crazy. It was a conservative seed round with a conservative valuation of the company. And the goal was to keep building the best developer experience to create the best user experience, keeping the community involved. So it's not, we have a governance where basically the company doesn't say what the frameworks will do. What I want to do with the company is to create pro offering, which is not required, but it's a nice plus to have in order to build faster. So what we've been building at the end is the Nuxt Studio, which is on top. We take a module, Nuxt content, and we offer a powerful interface, which is aiming for non-developer. So in that case, Nuxt Studio is for the marketing team to be able to edit your Nuxt content website synced with GitHub. Then we develop Nuxt UI Pro that I think you already mentioned in the podcast, which are premium component library, which help you ship faster. And lastly, my baby is NuxtHub, which helps you develop full stack application on your Cloudflare account, similar to Laravel Vapor. And I really liked how Laravel and how Taylor structured his company. Laravel didn't change; it's open source, built by the community, but he's trying to find product that makes business sense. Without denaturing the open source and being able to be sustainable. So that's my goal. And so far, we are getting closer and closer to the sustainability.
Which one of these different products is the most popular right now? Because so I see a lot about Nuxt UI Pro and NuxtHub, but that's because I'm like more on the developer side of things, and like Nuxt Studio, I don't really have any need for it because I'm just writing my stuff in Markdown like
if you're a
directly in my
developer,
repo
you don't
anyway.
need it.
Yeah. So like from your side, what do you think are people most excited about, and what do you think is the thing that like 5 years from now is going to be the biggest for NuxtLabs?
It's too different. It's difficult to answer. I don't follow them, of course. Nuxt UI Pro is the most popular for sure, and it also has these benefits of you buy it once and you own it. And as developer, I think we all love this philosophy. You own this major version, and anyway, we also made the upgrade from V1 to V3. There was no V2, so we could align with Nuxt UI.
Nice.
For free. And what we want is to empower, and at the end, we don't want to make just profit. We want to really give you a great value. And Nuxt UI Pro, I think, found the right spot in between. And I think NuxtHub has a very good potential. So far, I've been building with the help of Rehan, and I had the base, which so far is quite similar to what Cloudflare can provide. But my next goal is to add this business layer, such as authentication and CMS part, all of the things that you don't need to set up. But for this, we need to take the right decision between what ORM we should build on, what authentication libraries. I've been working on Nuxt.js, but we're taking the time to build this and take the right choice. We're also building in the open, so the NuxtHub core module is open source as well. So yeah, I would say Nuxt UI Pro is very popular. Also, since the V3, we open it to Vue. So any Laravel project or Ruby project can use Nuxt UI Pro with the Vue version. So that's very good. And NuxtHub is growing in a nice pace, and as well as Nuxt Studio, but it's indeed more for agencies.
So regarding NuxtHub, especially, like when that was announced, I think last year's Vue.js Amsterdam, could be, yeah, something like that, right? Then exactly. it was interesting to see a NuxtLabs product being very focused on one provider. Well, of course, like Nuxt, you can deploy anywhere. So maybe it'd be good just to elaborate. Why did you decide to say, hey, we go all in on Cloudflare? While there, of course, options are like, hey, I can use a database from somewhere else and so on and so on. But like, why was that? Is that focus on Cloudflare that big for NuxtHub?
That's a good question. But it's like Nuxt UI is based on Tailwind CSS somehow, or at one point Nuxt was based on Webpack. Focusing on one specific provider lets you move faster. And the advantage I've seen with Cloudflare is that they are very cheap. They have great features, and it was quite easy to create the missing developer experience they have. And I really enjoyed using Cloudflare so far, as they are basically you have server-side rendering for free, and instead of having to pay a Node.js server, I found it very appealing. And you can have a database, you can have a KV, so all the tools necessary needed to build a full stack application, and also in the free tier. So for me, the choice was quite simple because I wanted to give the Nuxt developers the ability to create Nuxt application with the server-side rendering. On top of this, on the edge, so close to other users worldwide, as fast as possible. So that was my prototype. We still have in mind. So that's the first step. Well, of course, what I want to do is the ability to open the NuxtHub core module to be more agnostic. So you can select your different database, and that's also why we're working with Puya and Nitro. As we have the database migration automated in NuxtHub, we want to have the ability to have Nitro database and migration. But this way we can test things, see if they work, and then make them agnostic on the NGS and Nitro side by collaborating with them.
But that's basically not an afterthought. It like the agnostic part is something you keep in mind, but starting with a more like designated provider.
Yeah, it's very hard to start agnostic, honestly, and already having something that work is also some work, and later opening will be easier. But so far, you can also deploy a NuxtHub application on Vercel with the remote storage, so you can connect to your other NuxtHub application deployed on Cloudflare. So that's also things I'm exploring. So how you can have the core, so you can leverage the Cloudflare resources like D1, KV, but having your main application deployed elsewhere. So
Interesting. I see. And while working closely with the platform and like the offers Cloudflare has, are you in contact with Cloudflare themselves? Did you like work together with some of the people to ensure, I don't know, that everything works as planned, or when you maybe had hit some issues? How did that work, if that happened?
yeah, well, of course, we collaborate with them weekly, at least. Some things are not available yet in development. As we don't support yet the Vite Environment API to have Workerd, we have to go through the platform proxy that emulate the features you can have in the workers, but locally. So some of them are not yet available. We also have some issues on the workers when they were updating their compatibility flags. So, but they are quite responsive, and I would like to really thank Dario from Cloudflare, who is such a great help on all my questions at any time in the day. So
big shout out there. So it is interesting to see you mentioned the Vite Environment API. That's basically because Nitro has no Vite Environment API like integration yet, and thus also not Nuxt. So when that comes in, I guess Nitro v3, then we'll get a Nuxt, also NuxtHub. Is that correct?
Yeah. When I don't know if it will be directly the Vite Environment API, or if it will be directly the ability to have presets, Nitro preset locally.
Oh, okay.
Which open a broader range. Because,
so like a dev preset, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, if you specify a Cloudflare as a Nitro preset, and you start locally, you should be able to use the Cloudflare Workerd platform. Puya would be the best person to talk about what he has in mind, but that's the vision we discussed about last time. So.
What is the environment API? Because I've heard about this, but I'm a little fuzzy on what exactly it is.
Do you want to go ahead, Alexander?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about that. Actually, to refer to the episode with Patak here as well, episode 51, where we talked about Vite in depth. So the point was to just like make a very quick overview. In Vite, you always had like two environments: server-side rendered and not server-side rendered, so client-side. But the problem in a way is that this is not enough nowadays when you have, maybe one environment is your Cloudflare workers, which is not exactly Node server-side rendered. So it's a subset of that. There may be some different settings to be applied and so on and so on. And in a way, there is the tool which is used on top of Nitro by other tools, like it's called Vinci. And Vinci was basically allowing to have certain, well, not environments as the Vite Environment API, but the same goal, like to split your application further into certain parts. And with Vite 6, the Environment API came out to say, okay, look, you have the freedom to define these environments and to switch between them depending on the parts of your application. While before the V team was looking into a different API that was just not enough. And especially the people from Cloudflare were also saying like, hey, we need a bit more than that. So it's something very Vite specific and especially interesting for framework and like platform teams and framework authors, and also to some degree library authors for sure. So ideally you would just consume it as a user and work fine. But it's definitely interesting to, as I said before, rewatch the episode with Patak and also link in the description to all around that and give feedback if you're interested in that as well. Because it's available, but as usual, software is never done. So that might be a good idea to check out.
You can think of it, and it's a great explanation you did. The difference between JavaScript in the browser versus JavaScript in Node is that you don't have access to window, and in Node.js, in the browser, you don't have access to the file system. Well, in the worker environment, it's another runtime where you don't have access to window and you don't have access to file system. So it's more limited, and you may not have some Node.js API. So instead of having the surprise after building your application and running in the worker that, hey, this Node.js API is not available. The goal is to bring this runtime in development. It's actually possible if you run Wrangler dev, but with frameworks like Nuxt, we have the build process. So what you don't want is to build every time to test locally, because it will take too much time. So it's how you can bring this environment, this limited runtime, directly to replace your Node.js runtime when you server render your app or you call API routes.
That's great to add. Yeah, I think that simplifies it a lot as well. And I think like use cases like Cloudflare workers, I think also like React server components could be very interesting. You're like, hey, that's another subset, and so on and so on. So a lot of scenarios that might be framework agnostic, but also that could be framework related. And in a way, I'm really glad to see that this is something that was like coming from the community, and like all the different people, like platforms, framework authors, and so on, saying, hey, we need something more expressive, and then Vite responding to that, but like, okay, let's figure something out that benefits everyone. And I remember like when the API was drafted, that was like at DevWorld last year. So like in February, like close after Vue.js Amsterdam. It was so funny because like all the people there from the V team who were around, like we're like all gathering around the table. I'm like, there and this. And this was like where we're like real collaboration, like also real life collaboration. It sparked so much energy. And then here we go.
Yeah, this is very exciting.
Absolutely. I would be curious to like once again zoom out a little bit, because a lot of people of the community, of like a Vue and Nuxt community, they think a lot of like Nuxt and NuxtLabs as like one bigger entity, while you already established that's not the case. So for example, when you got like the seed round, then they didn't get like a part of Nuxt as the framework, but of the company NuxtLabs. Maybe it might be a good idea to like explain once again what the difference is in terms of, you already mentioned a few parts like governance, but also in general between the framework, like the project Nuxt, and the NuxtLabs, the company behind it.
Yeah. So there is things that basically, I think it could be similar to Void Zero and Vite, the relationship between Void Zero and Vite. Even though Vite, the maintain like Batak is not working for Void Zero, it doesn't change the fact that Void Zero may have the trademark of Vite, for instance, to protect the brand, that avoiding other companies to leverage this as an open source framework under the MIT license. So basically what I've did with NuxtLabs is to protect the creation, my creation, by registering the trademark and the domains. So that's what we have. And then it's open source under MIT, so it belongs to no one except the maintainers. I specifically gave the owner role on the GitHub organization. Like I said, it's all about trust. And but so far, it's all about the trademark and the usage of the commercial entities we can do around it. Then it's open source, so it belongs to no one. Anyone can fork. It's all about the people we can trust, and I decided to trust the owners, the Nuxt core team, including you, Alex, and that's our decision at the end. Whatever the company can do in terms of development of the framework.
I think that's a good overview in that sense, to like separate. And you already mentioned in terms of governance, like NuxtLabs is not governing the direction of Nuxt itself. A bit like Void Zero is not governing the direction of Vite. Of course, there are people working like full-time, part-time, whatever on the project. But in the end, and that's also another similarity, like both Vite and also Nuxt are like multi-company project from like people from different companies. Like a lot of core team members have a day job, right? They don't do full-time open source, but also quite some people are working either like part-time or almost full-time, sponsored through NuxtLabs. So that's also something I think should be highlighted here to make that clear.
Yeah, it's all about the people working on Nuxt, the core team. We had different core team in Nuxt, and the project always stays. Whatever the people are working on, what I do at NuxtHub is making sure I give as much as possible time to people to work on Nuxt, on the core team. So that's either by having a contract with them to work full-time, or having a sponsoring to give a little bit, either give them time or just give them a thank you for the help. And that's if I could, I would love to have everyone working full time. That would be my dream. But so far, we can manage to have few people. And but yeah, then so far Daniel is the lead of the project, and we discuss every Friday on the core team meeting about the direction. even though I'm the CEO at NuxtLabs, that doesn't change. It's people deciding what's going on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's important to have these distinction as well, and like not basically the company influencing where the framework goes, because I think also that wouldn't really work. It would lead to conflicts at some point, or like, I don't know, a fork or whatnot. I mean, we've seen a lot of drama in terms of open source and like weird actions from, I don't know, not just saying WordPress, right? But yeah.
No, I completely understand. I think there is a lot of fears that are not well explained in my mind about a company dictating the framework. There is no advantage of a company of destroying a framework because so far what we do is we benefit from Nuxt being chosen, and what we want is Nuxt being chosen by everybody. And then the ability to explain them. If you want, you can contribute back to the. At the end, what does it mean to have this Nuxt independence? It's the ability to work full time on the open source and not worrying about paying your bills at the end of the month. So for this, and even better if the source of income doesn't depend of one company. That's even better. But so far, the ability for a company to be self-sustainable and work on open source, I don't see this as something bad personally. And I think that's what Laravel is doing very well. WordPress is another story versus their hosting, but so far they've been doing very well. And I think it's also comforting for people when they need to decide about a framework that if there is a company behind that is sustainable, it's also reassuring. So, and that was also an issue we had, I think, regarding Vue.js about the fact that it was only maintained by Evan at one point, and there is this buzz factor that what happens if something bad happens to Evan, where you like if it's a company, then they benefit from the open source to be sustainable, so they will need to find someone else to maintain the framework. So there are trade-offs, and with the time, and I really hope people can see that the company is not something bad, depending, of course, of their owners and their. But I think I've proving so for 8 years that you can have a company and trying to make it the best for the community and the open source. So
Agreed
so
here.
yeah, I'm confident.
Agreed.
Yeah.
From this perspective, just real quick, because you said like, okay, especially with Vue being like an independent framework and not having, I don't know, a Google or Meta, whatsoever behind, or like a company. While this, of course, is like the appearance at first is just Evan, but especially in the last years, of course, it also changed a lot. I mean, there's the core team around it. You mentioned Eduardo already. There's so many other people involved. On the other hand, people are saying, okay, and I've heard it a couple of times, and like also had some interesting discussions around that Nuxt is a venture-backed framework. So how far would you agree with that statement?
NuxtLabs is a venture backed, and that is developing the majority of the people at NuxtLabs help developing the Nuxt project so far. So that's depends what's wrong with the venture backed. Also, I'm trying to figure it out. I think we had the idea of because you raise money, and I have a good example of Symfony, who is a PHP framework. They were venture backed. They raised funds. They got one round. They were able to develop the framework and a premium offering, and then they were self-sustainable. So after a while, they decided to buy their shares back from the investors, and that's it. End of the story. That's it's all about what you do with the money. For me, that's investing in the framework. Whatever next step stays or not, I know the framework will pursue, and that's what matters. So I know I will have invested as much as I can in the vision of the open source framework.
I think that's a really good conclusion, because like usually, like I also try to say the same, like, okay, Nuxt is not venture capital backed. And if, God forbid, right, if NuxtHub would not exist at one point, Nuxt would probably still be there in different ways, maybe with different capacities, but it's not like that the people will just vanish because there's some venture capital running out.
And it's same for Void Zero and Vite, I think.
Yeah, I think people's concern is that when you get VC money, then the investors, they're trying to look for like a good outcome financially. And so then they might pressure you to, do things that prioritize profit, which might ruin the framework. But the way you've set it up is like, Daniel gets some sponsorship from you. And so that's just part of how you're trying to help like promote the development of Nuxt, but he's not like taking orders from you, and like, you know, he's not going to screw up the Nuxt framework just because, you know, it's going to make you a bit more money. And so I think like
technically
there's
we
the
have
whole
a contract.
team.
Technically, we have a contract for him to work full time. Like we have a contract for him with Puya to work full time.
Okay.
Whatever we say it's a sponsor or not, I give a lot of freedom to let him work on the open source. So that can be considered as sponsoring. But for me, I want also to be sure that he can work as much as he can freely. There is no, I don't give any,
Right.
I don't force him to go to conference. It's how I work in open source. And regarding the investor, I think it's very important to mention that first you decide what investors you work with, depending of how popular and how needed you want. I could say we were lucky, but we were also choosing what investors will go with us. And also we did a pre-seed and a seed round. So we're not at that stage where investors asking you to bring them back money. What they want is they're not going to work at your place. Basically, they invest in you because they believe that you will create a company that will grow. And of course, at one point, we'll bring them their 10x or 100x. But I was very lucky to have Jean-Patrice, who also invested in Strapi, who helped them build this open source vision. At the end, their question is, how can we help? Basically, what are your doubts? And you build with this. I'm confident we didn't change the nature of Nuxt, and we build premium solution around it. We also have this Nuxt expert network where we collaborate with you, Alex, on trying to help some Nuxt community member collaborate directly with enterprise customers as freelancer. And we see if it works. If it doesn't work, it's fine. We move on. But I never imagined to have a Nuxt Pro version. And I think it will never happen.
Like freemium, basically, or like open core or whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, I really found Laravel nice, as it's just stuff that you don't need. But if you use, you just save time. And that's basically what most people said at the end is saving time.
Yeah, and like to your point about the whole like investment and everything like that, seeing how you and the Nuxt core team have operated over the last several years, like I have no concerns about any of this, and I'm like, you know, very much invested in the future of Nuxt. And I really hope that NuxtLabs gets to a place where you're more than just sustainable, but like able to do like fund even more and give people even more opportunity to work on open source. So I'm excited to see where everything goes here.
Same here. Yeah, just best of success. And maybe that's almost a good end, but there is one more thing I want to ask, a little sneak peek into the future. Sebastian, can you share anything with us that's like coming soon to any of the NuxtLabs projects maybe, or anything that's people could be excited about?
We may revive Docus.
No. For everybody not have ever heard about Docus, what is that?
It's documentation generator, similar to VitePress, but powered by Nuxt. We're using the Nuxt UI Pro docs template, making it as a CLI, so you can just focus on having Markdown file while keeping the extensibility. And then what we want, of course, is add ITN and all these nice features. But also, as we're working with NuxtHub and the AI part, we want to add this auto-rag feature. So your documentation website will also have the Ask AI feature by default. So exploring, and so far we need to rewrite all of our documentation's website for the modules with Nuxt UI v3. So it's a good way. So this will be open source very soon. I think it will be Docus v2. On Nuxt UI, we have plenty of work, but you can see the roadmap on the UI website. And on the NuxtHub, we want to add the environments, because workers are great, but so far you don't have the preview environment. So your pull request, you don't have the preview URL. So we want to make sure you can have the preview environment. So we need to create a separate worker, but also the ability to create a new environment, let's say staging or pre-production, and you can have your own database KV that will be created automatically. So adding this and also fixing this, as we added the GitHub action, now you have build time environment variables and runtime. We want to put them so you don't need to specify on the GitHub action as well. So developer experience improvement mostly. So and open source. So
even better. Yeah, looking forward to these changes. They're very exciting, especially like what you've tweeted about also before, and not even mentioned the whole part of like NuxtHub, Cloudflare pages, and now moving to workers to get all the good features. So I think that's like what a lot of people kind of waited for.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to have this authentication by default to help people push as much, to deploy project as fast as possible. So that's an exciting time.
Sweet. Then, Sébastien, I think we can only ask one more question here. Where can people follow you? Where can people find out more about like all the things NuxtLabs doing, you're doing? Share everything with us so people can subscribe, follow. You know the drill. Yeah.
So I'm at Linux on Blue Sky, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, all the social media actually, and NuxtLabs.com. NuxtLabs on Twitter, Blue Sky, LinkedIn. I think you get everything. It's also nice to subscribe to the Nuxt newsletter on Nuxt.com at the bottom right, if I remember well. And yeah, that's and listen to DejaVue and you get the best news.
Perfect. I don't have to say anything else, right? Sébastien, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure talking to you about the history of Nuxt and NuxtLabs and everything around the amazing products you and the team are building. Big shout out to all the folks working at NuxtLabs, no matter if it's on open source or on everything around that. And hope to see you soon on again for some more content, of course.
Thank you for having me. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, see you all. Bye.
Yeah.